I'm Brad.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Liam. And this isn't even my house.
Where is Matt? In the last episode, we got our fascias and soffits on, we got our roof installed, and we also put on some artificial grass.
Now we're going to be getting the frame built for our deck. We're going to be getting the floor prepared, the bathroom tiled, and also getting the water and the electrics down to the building. I'm going to be taking this up to Phil so we can get our water mains connected.
We're now at the top of where we're going to be digging our trench, because this is the water supply we're going to be connecting on. This is an old trough, it's no longer needed, so we're going to use that water supply and that stop clock to connect on, so we've got power down at the bottom. So let's get digging our trench. Not sure why I said power when all we're pulling in is water, but anyway, we started to get on with it.
Looks like we ain't digging there then. This is why it's always good to grab a CAT scan, because there's actually something under there, so we're just going to quickly reroute it round the outside to make sure that we don't hit anything.
I didn't like that route anyway. So with our new route selected, we rescanned, and then it was time to start digging. We only actually dug a small section so that we could get the joint made where we're taking the water from, which is where that trough is. The reason we're doing that is because this field needs to be accessed, so we can't have it open for too long, and we wasn't ready to dig the whole trench yet. So we got our man Mark Tiffin to connect up the water, and then using the digger I carefully removed the old trough without spilling a drop of water, as you can see. With that out of the way, we hand dug the last section because we didn't want to risk damaging anything else underneath the floor with the digger. Fed that little section of pipe in, and then we backfilled that entrance, because remember, this thing's used for access, so we can't have it open. So I backfill it, roll the digger over just to compact it a little bit, and then we can get on with digging the rest of our trench. Now we're going to get our blue water pipe pulled in to our trench. When I said that, I thought it was going to be easy, but rolling 100 meters worth of blue pipe was actually a bit of a pain. What I don't want to do is fall in here, that's for sure. It's very deep at the moment. It really was. 750mm deep to be precise. Great success. Let's go and get this pulled into the trench. As you can hear by my voice, I was super excited to do another lap of that trench. So with the pipe all pulled in, I used the digger to half backfill that trench up to 450mm, and it was time to jump back inside. The room is prepped, ready for our tiling, but you remember we got Dan in to do our double glazing? Well, we've now got Dan back.
There he is.
And now he's going to be doing our tiling. So now we can call this the DB show.
Before we do any tiling, we need to tank our walls, and we're going to be using BW1.
With Dan's best Blue Peter impression out of the way, let me explain exactly what BW1 is. So this is a tanking system unlike any other, because as you can see, we're painting directly onto unprepped plasterboard. So this system has been created to make everything super easy. So the only prep work we have to do with this system is to use BT1 in the joints directly in the shower, as you can see that white silicone there. And then we're going to be painting this system in two directions. So the first coat we're going to go up and down, and when I say where, I mean Dan is, because I'm not doing it. And then once that starts to set, we need to do a second coat going the opposite direction, so we're going across. It's really that simple. No tape, no nothing. So we really like that system, and I'm not sure about the face that Dan just pulled. So Dan gets on making sure we've got full coverage, and then we can get the protection we put on the tray off, and that is the room ready for tiling. The tanking has dried, but before we move on to our tiling, Second City Screed are actually back to grind this floor. So you may remember these guys from when they did the flow screed. They're now back to remove the latents off the top. So that's just something that comes out of flow screed, and you need to remove it because you won't be able to adhere anything to it. And because we're having LVT, we need this floor to be perfect. So although this machine looks super aggressive, it actually only removes about 1 millimeter of product off the top, and then it leaves a nice dull flat finish at the end. So the guys get on, making sure to clean up all of the dust behind them, and that is the floor prepped ready for latex or smoothing compound.
So the boys have got me back in to start all the tiling.
That's right, DB is back ready for a bit of tiling.
There is a pattern forming, Philip.
You're right, and that pattern is on anything that's hard to do. We get Dan to come back and do it for us. What you've just seen us do is lay out all of the tiles. There's 3 different styles, as you can see from our piles. Oh, that rhymed. And then we've just mixed and matched them until we're happy with the design. Now they're laid out, we can start getting ready to cut and install. So when it comes to tiling, it's all in the prep work. So our walls are nice and flat, our tanking's done, and now we've decided on the layout and we're marking out for our grout lines and also the top of that first row that we're going to be installing. So with that marked out, we get a laser set up, so that's going to help us get our tiles completely level when we come to installing them, and it also gives Dan something to measure from, so he can pre-cut all of the tiles ready to go in. Because we're going to be using something called rapid adhesive, we are not going to have time to put the adhesive on the wall and then cut the tiles after. So really, we want everything cut ready to go. So Dan gets on with cutting. He's using a wet saw here, and he's also using some buffing pads. That just takes any of the rough edges off the tiles and leaves a super smooth finish. When it comes to the pipe work, it's the same thing. We need to mark them out, and then we cut them all outside using a little 4-inch grinder, making sure all of our cuts are in the perfect position. With the smaller cuts, we just use diamond tipped hole saws.
So we've got 4 full tiles cut, and we're going to knock up some adhesive and get them on the wall.
Once we had checked that Dan hadn't had a stroke and he was just zoning out, we got on with applying our adhesive to the wall where our first 4 tiles are going to be going. So you may be asking, why are we only doing 4 tiles? Well, because they're large format and this adhesive is rapid, it's better just to mix up a small amount, and that then gives us time to make sure everything is in the correct position and perfect. So with these large format tiles, we are using something called leveling clips, but even though we're using those, you still need to use a level to make sure that everything is completely flat. If you like the look of these tiles or anything in this shower room, go check out Easy Bathrooms. They have sponsored this segment, so big shout out to those guys, and the link will be in the description below. Now that the floor has been ground to remove the latency, the guys have gone away and they've come back ready to install the smoothing compound.
Before we go in with the smoothing compound, we've got to check this floor is dry with this moisture meter.
I'm not sure who spiked Joe's drink with sugar, but I love it. His energy is just great.
Testing's done. Now it's time to go in with the primer.
Apart from the primer, one of the most important steps that you need to take when doing this job is to be wearing safety socks. So the socks that Joe is wearing, they may look like ordinary socks, but they're not. They offer high protection against risks you may face while on site. So Joe gets on with priming the room, and once that's done, it's allowed to dry and we can get on with the smoothing compound itself.
And now that it's gone off tacky, we're going to mix up some smoothing compound.
Wow, thanks Charlie. So that's exactly what they did. They got on with mixing up the smoothing compound.
Now that it's perfectly mixed, we're going to get this down.
While the lads were making the mixes, Joe got on with pouring them in. So this was all happening simultaneously. So Joe started to use his cam rake to move it about while the lads were mixing up the next batch, because you don't want any of the edges to dry. So Joe took off his safety socks and put himself on some fancy new footwear. These are called spiked shoes. They basically allow you to walk inside of that smoothing compound without getting it all over your shoes and all over the floor.
So what Joe's doing is gently pushing it into the corners and then pulling the cam rake away to get a nice even surface.
So a cam rake is literally what it says on the tin. It is a rake with cams on it. So it allows you to set that rake at a certain height off the floor underneath. So we've got 3mm, so we end up with a perfect thickness.
Just make sure when you're mixing up your smoothing compound that you mix it to the exact amount of water required for your one.
So like Brad said, when you are mixing this up, follow the instructions and make sure you put the amount of water that is specified on the brand that you pick. It's super important so you get that perfect finish.
So if anybody wants any liquid screed, underfloor heating or resin driveways, the link is in the description below.
Excuse me, Joe, I think you'll find that's my part. But as you've done it already, I'll let it slide this one time.
We've got to get this big roller cable from here all the way to here.
Yep, it's time to go back to my favourite trench. So before we get to the trench itself, we need to cut open the entrance to the driveway and create a 450mm deep cavity to take the cable across to where it's going to be connected. So using the petrol cutter that we got from Speedy Hire, we cut 2 perfectly straight lines and then use a breaker to break that top layer of concrete out before getting the bucket that we got from Rhinox to dig the hole. I had a little break in between and then I got back to work.
As you can see, people, we're digging down to 450. Deep down there is where we're going to be putting our cable. Phil operating the machinery over there.
Our plan is to tip this on his front somehow. It only weighs 425 kg. And then once it's up, we're going to roll out enough to get around the building that we're going to be taking our power from. And then with all that easy peasy bit out of the way, we're going to roll it down the field, hopefully. First things first, we needed to get it on its side. So with that done, we start to push it towards the house because the plan was to unreel as much of that cable as we could, ready to pull it into that little chase we dug in the driveway. Problem was, the outside of the drum was bigger than the inside. So because we didn't stay in school, we didn't realise this when we made our plan. Every time we rolled it, the cable was getting pulled along with it. But we managed, and we start to get that cable pulled into position, which isn't as easy as it sounds.
I'm pushing it. Wait. Go back. Oh my God. Digging those. Oh. Every single bit of my leg. Oh.
Strange. I always thought it was a dock leaf you used on stinging nettles. But it turns out you just need a really big broom. What, you're not to the corner yet?
Not to the far end, no.
Not great success. Once I'd got over the excitement of this job, we got on with pulling through more cable to get to the corner of the building where we was connecting it, and then we could finally lay it into that chase that we created, and then we put some tape over. This may seem a bit pointless, but that can actually save someone when they're digging it up because that's the first thing to come out. With that done, it's time to start rolling it down the hill, and as you can see, it just kept pulling the cable out constantly. After a little while, we took it down to the bottom field and just unreeled it by hand. Then we connected it to the digger because the cable was so light we didn't want to do it by hand, and then we pulled it all the way to the end of our trench. With the cable roughly in position, we parked the digger up and it was time for some manual labour. So we pull the cable into position, get back in the digger, and we can get it all backfilled, and that is that job complete. Cable is in our big massive chase. We've put some marker tape over the top just to help someone if they ever dig it, you never know. And then we're going to put some shingle on top of that, and then we're going to backfill and reconcrete this chase. So that's exactly what we did. We grabbed some bags of shingle. This is 10mm, as you can see in big white writing on the bag. We put that over just to cover over the top, and then we backfill it with some of that rubble that come out of it when we dug it, and then we left about 4 inches on top for a nice little bit of concrete.
Now that the water and electric is all running, it's time to install our weed membrane for our deck.
So this job is fairly easy. You literally just roll it out wherever you're going to be building the deck. But although it is easy, it is important because you don't want anything growing up in between your deck when you build it. That's our membrane done. Now we can start with the framing for our deck. So we're going to be using some 6x2 treated C24 timber. The reason I'm only using 6-inch timber on this deck is because the span is quite short. It's only actually about 2 meters wide. So because we're using composite deck, we're marking out at 300 centers, not your typical 400. So I'll mark everything on the bench and then I'll assemble it on the floor once it's all marked out. I just find it a lot easier to do it that way. With the first of the timbers marked out, we take it over to the chop saw and chop off anything that we need to shorten. So these are a set size, so we just shorten them down to what we need. So that full length I marked out is going to go on the outside, and that cut piece will go against the building. With our first parts ready to go, it's time to start assembling our frame. So to put it together, we're using 90mm framing nails, and they're also ring shanked, so it just stops them from coming out in the future. Now these are not the only fixings we're going to be using.
Now that this is built, we're going to get this in position and level using some temporary feet.
Because I do my posts after the frame's built, it's easier for us just to put it on some temporary bits of timber to hold it in position, ready for when we dig.
Oh my God.
Ideal, is it?
No, that's not ideal. So we get a few more fixings in our temporary feet, and it's time to move on to the second half of this corner. So the way I'm building this is to start on the corner. So we've got 2 matching sections that wrap around, and we're leaving the middle open, and you'll see why in a moment. So this is the way I do it. I find it easier to build in sections rather than trying to build the whole frame on the outside and then infill it all. It's just easier to do this, put some temporary feet on it and build it in sections. It also means the sections are light enough that 2 people can lift them into position and also bring it up to the height we need. With this section built to this stage, I'm just going to check this corner with a building square just to make sure it's pretty close, because we can adjust it slightly when we put our permanent posts in, which, well, it's actually perfectly square, so that's lucky. So now that we know it's square, I'm going to get on with infilling this section here. So the reason we left the center section empty is because we're having something called a breaker board, and we need to frame to take that. So it's always important to plan your deck frame ahead of time. So we're putting in a 45-degree ladder section, which you're seeing me build now, and that's going to pick up the breaker board, and it's also going to pick up the ends of the 2 decks. And just like the rest of the deck, this also needs to have some noggins inside of it at 300mm. You still need to support that breaker board like you would the rest. So we measure out for 300mm all the way through that center section and install noggins using our 90mm framing nails. And when it all comes together, you'll see why it's called a ladder section, because it literally resembles a ladder.
Now that section's in, this will give us the actual exact measurements we need to infill the gaps.
And what he means by that is some angled cuts. So all of the pieces from here to the rest of the deck are going to have a 45-degree cut that meet that ladder. So I like to measure it out and have equal pieces both sides, so we start from the end and work our way back to that deck that we've already built. The way you do this is to measure that straight section at 300mm sections like everything else, and then cut your 45-degree and just make sure they're all sat completely square to the frame and at 45 degrees to that ladder section, and that is the little detail complete. That's the intricate part of the deck complete. Now we're going to build some smaller sections to extend it. There's a few reasons why I do this deck in sections. One, like I said before, it's easier to build them and move them into position, but also this adds extra strength to our deck. So this is only going to span 2 meters, and then when we add our little extra section that goes to our post, which you'll see in a bit, we've now got a board supporting through the middle. So it's a lot stronger than having spans of over 2 meters. So we get on with building the rest of the sections, call in all of the help that we can find to lift it into place, because I don't want to do any heavy lifting myself, and then we nail the 2 together before moving in that final section that spans to the posts. They're actually holding the roof above. add a little section so we can get through the gap, and that is the basic framing complete for our composite deck.
Me and Phil are split up into two teams today. He's going to be jumping on with the deck. Me and Dan are going to be getting on with the resin driveway. Our first task of today is getting the grano dust down because the delivery driver wouldn't take it down for us. So me and Dan are going to have to use the digger.
We're going to try anyway.
They're not going to try, they're going to do it. I have every faith that that digger has got the muscle to get that bag down.
We don't have problems, we have solutions.
A bit of to-in and throw-in, and the bag was on the digger, and I can assure you it was at its maximum capacity because it pretty much wheelied the whole way down the field. But it got the job done.
And that is how you do it.
Before we can get any resin down, we've got to get this base prepared.
And it was nice for once for someone else to be in the digger and not me.
Right then, so what we're doing now is basically reducing the dig to allow us to have 150mm of sub base compacted and rolled, ready for a resin.
And Dan soon found that this wasn't no easy dig. This house seems to be built on some sort of quarry because there's just rocks and boulders everywhere. But he got it done.
We're setting some lines to our finished levels of our edgings. Obviously we're not going to be level, but we're going to be flat and straight. We are following the ground level.
So before this job started, me and Dan had a little discussion about what was going to look best. And we decided that following the ground was going to make it tie in to the land around it. So that's what we did. So it's going to be flat, but it's not going to be level.
Now Dan's going around with his shovel. He's going to square it up just so we can get a nice clean edge with the curbs.
The curbs are going to be following the decking, and they're also going to be going along the edge where the land is. So we need to get all of that tidied up, even if it means getting out the shovel. With everything cleaned up, it's time to pull some lines to set the finish height of the resin and the curbs when we come to install them. While Dan's digging out for our resin, I have levelled the whole frame up, and now we're going to start installing some 4-inch posts every metre. When it comes to the posts, I'm going to be doing something called a half lap. The reason I do this rather than just bolting directly to the frame is because I think that it gives a better support. So I set my saw at half the thickness of the post, and I also used my table saw to cut out most of that joint, and I just finished it off with a hand saw, and then we can slot that underneath our frame, and then we attach it using some timber locks. So we got out the auger to dig the hole for the post, but unfortunately the deck is too high and I haven't got the extension for it. So out comes the shovel, and it's back to a bit of manual labour. So I was super excited about doing one. Unfortunately, I've got about another 35 to 40 to dig. Even though we've levelled the whole frame, we're going to go back around as we do each post and just double check that everything's perfect before chucking in some postcrete and then moving on to the next. I set up my laser on the post. You can just see it in the background, and that stayed there for the rest of the job, and I just kept checking the posts. Here you can see I'm not actually digging a hole because this is where our water and electricity comes in. So I made a little pad and boxed it in. That way I've still got a post, but I haven't got to risk digging down into those cables. And while all of this is going on, Dan starts to dig out for our waste pump that we're going to be installing.
Now we've got our hole all squared up, it's time to prepare our pump station.
While Dan is preparing the pump station, I should explain what this is. So, you know the old saying, you can't push you know what uphill? Well, that is true. So we need this pump station to get the waste from the bathroom uphill, because this building is about 3.5 meters lower than where the waste is situated at the house.
That is the tank all prepped up, ready to go in. Now we're going to mix up some concrete to put a nice base down for the tank to sit on.
At this point, it was about 5 p.m. in the evening and we all just wanted to go home. But unfortunately, we had booked in to have the resin done over the next couple of days. So we had no choice but to get this pump station installed and backfilled. So me, Brad and Dan got on with creating this 300mm concrete base that had to be completely level before dropping in the pump station itself. Once that was in, we still had to fill that up with water and install the waste pipe so that we could actually backfill it with concrete. So Dan got on with leveling the pump station, filling it up, and then we could backfill it.
It got a little late last night and we couldn't film because the cameras weren't picking up much. But we have set this in with 300mm concrete base and then filled it up halfway and let that set overnight. Also, Dan, what else have you been up to with the drainage?
So basically we've got the 4-inch soil pipe installed on 100mm P shingle and surrounded. We've managed to get the flexi in from the pump, which is run up to the corner position where we need it. Now what we're going to do is get the second pipe in, which is the outlet from the pump, laid in the trench, backfill it with P shingle, level it off, job done.
Something like that.
Oh my god, that is so loud.
So bad.
Yep, you did just witness 3 grown adults screaming down a pipe. So once we had finished messing around, we started to unreel that large cable that's going to be returning the waste uphill and installing it into our pump station. So just like most push fit stuff, this is the same, but it's just a lot bigger. I believe this is about 67mm or something along those lines. So we install it before getting it into our trench and backfilling. So we push the shingle over the top just like we did the one below it, and that blue pipe, for those of you wondering, that is not water, that is just a bit of spare of water pipe that we had left over, and we put it over the flexi cable that comes with the pump station just to add a little bit extra protection to the cable.
Now that the pipes are fully protected in P shingle and the concrete has gone off from last night, myself and Brad are going to continue and fill in around this tank with concrete up to this line. Let's get it on.
While Brad and Dan got the pump in, I was still digging holes. So I was trying to use the auger as best I could, getting it in at an angle just to try and help remove some material, but most of it I was having to do by hand. And while this was all happening, Dan started to fully backfill that trench because it crossed over where our resin was going.
That is the mini pump station completely installed. If anyone's looking for any drainage or this type of stuff, look up Quattro Civils. The link is in the description below.
Remember I was saying about double checking all of our levels? Well, where this is sat on the mud on those temporary feet, this corner has actually dropped 20 mil, so that's why it's important to always double check as you go around. So we're going to get this lifted and get that post concreted in. Me and Dan then created this little lever just to help lift the weight of that deck. We did that both sides, and it was time to do a few more posts on this deck build.
The poo tank is now installed. We are going to crack on and get all our lines set for our edgings for the resin.
Although Dan already did a set of lines, that was for the dig itself. These are more accurate, so these are going to set the height, and they're also going to make sure the resin finishes square to our deck build, because we want everything to tie in together. So we're going to make sure everything is nice and flat and nice and square, and then we're finally ready to start prepping our base.
As you can see, we've got all the string lines in now. So what we're going to do, knock up some ballast, get them edgings placed in line with all these string lines.
So this just shows how important it is to have yourself some string lines set up nice and flat, nice and perfect. Because we've got nothing going in level, you couldn't use a level to set these curbs in place. You need that line. So Dan starts to set his curbs to the line, and the only time he whips out a level is to set the top and the front, and then he works his way the other directions on that corner, so then he's set, ready to do the 2 long runs in these curbs.
Now we've got our corners perfectly square, we're going to start working our way down the line.
Brad jumped on the mixer. Yes, Brad was actually doing a little bit of work this day, and Dan just continued to lay in these curbs. So I had to make a little plan with Dan because he was about to wrap round where the deck is and I hadn't finished doing my posts. I know, I'm slow. It takes me a long time to dig a hole. So as he got towards the deck, Dan actually had to stop and then go to the front and start going around the other way. So normally you just continue on, but you know, we have to work together on this project. He's trying to keep out of my way and I'm trying to keep out of his way.
So what I'm doing now is basically backing up these curbs. So what that's going to do is lock these curbs into position so that when the vehicles come in and out, they're solid and going nowhere.
Because this is Matt's house, who knows what's going to happen on this pad. So Dan needed to make sure that was super strong and going to hold that resin in place. And while that was happening, I was still adding bracing to the deck. So as well as the posts that we're doing on the outside and the inside, out here where we've already got the posts, I've put this bearer in, and that's going to help take the extra weight that's going in this back corner, and you'll see exactly what that is a little bit later in the video. With the bearer in, I add in 2 more posts on that front section, getting out of Dan's way so we can add in some more curbs, and I also add some along that front edge where he is now so that Dan can get on with finishing those curbs.
This man has been helping me get the perfect mix all day. Am I a professional at mixing?
Almost.
Oh my! What are we saying out of 10?
9 out of 10.
9 out of 10. He's being generous.
You're right, Mark was being generous. It was more like a 3 out of 10.
Now all our edging's in, what we're going to do is start getting the base prepared. So we're going to spread some of this hardcore, making sure it's all locked in nice and tight, then top it up with some tight one, ready for the resin.
You wouldn't necessarily need the hardcore, but we slightly overdug this. That was because we went to levels of ground that wasn't actually the finished level, it was where we had put oversight. So we just filled it up with some tightly compact boulders that had come out of the ground already before laying in our type 1. Now for those of you that like things nice and neat like Dan, this next bit is going to drive you insane just like it did us. When we ordered our type 1, for some reason they sent about 7 different colours, so it just didn't look great, but it all does the same job.
We found our new helper, look, it's Rob.
We've got Robbie in, we've got Jake in.
Wouldn't it be the home improvement channel if we didn't get people to help us?
That's the name of the game.
Rob? I could have swore that was Machine Gun Kelly. Well, anyway, so with the guys helping, we get on with preparing the base, ready for our resin, and that is all the curbs done and all the prep work complete and compacted, ready for that resin to go on top. As well as posts, we're also creating a bearer. So what that is some posts through the middle of this span here, and it's going to take any bounce. So what we do, we set some posts in. We've got ourselves some 6x2, so we're going to lift that up underneath so it's nice and tight all the way up. And then I'm going to fix it into the post. So I've got one side and one on the other side. So we put a total of 2 fixings on each post. And the way I install the post on the middle is to dig the holes and then attach the post after. That way I haven't got to worry about lining it up. So far what we've done, we've got our single 6x2, we've got 4 posts, so I don't tend to span them any more than 1 metre, so this is slightly smaller. Now we're going to put a second plate the other side. And it's the same process, we lift it up nice and tight to the joists above and then add 2 fixings on each of the posts before nailing down those joists into that bearer. So the reason I nail in, just spiking them down, is because if any of these are not actually bearing down at one point and you walk on it, you might get like a tapping noise. So if you just spike it in, it's always making contact and you won't get any creaking or noise. And that is the bearing complete. We actually added 2 to this little section because of the extra weight that's going to be going on top. And once that's in position and we're happy everything's fixed in place, we can get ready to add in our post creep, which is a little bit awkward now because we're trying to fish in between those joists. But we get it done, and then me and Liam have a little jiggle on the end of the deck to celebrate. Now that all our posts are done, we can start to install some hangers. This may seem a little bit over the top, seeing as we've already nailed the frame together, but for the cost of a hanger, the extra strength you gain, it just makes sense to always add them in. So we're using our Plasload PPN, saves you so much time when installing anything with twist nails, making sure that every joist that can have one gets a hanger, and we fill in all of those nail holes with those twist nails. That's all of our hangers installed with our twist nails from our PPN gun. We're now going to use the angle grinder and cut all of the tops off. You can buy hangers that you don't need to cut down, but this was all we could get at a time, so it only takes 10 minutes to cut them all down, so it wasn't really a big deal. With all them cut down, I've got one more job with the frame, and that is to install some structural screws anywhere I couldn't get a hanger. So this one's next to a post, so I'm just going to go straight through the end, and that's just going to make sure that that one is fully secured. And also on this little section, obviously I can't get a hanger on that, so I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go straight through the side and then into this bearer here, and then that way that's not going to go anywhere. I went through and added all of the structural screws wherever we needed them. I also added the structural screws where the 2 sections of frame were added together.
Now we're going to protect the top of our joist using some deck tape.
Deck tape is basically an alternative to bitumen that a lot of people use. So some people paint the tops, some people tape them. And when I say some people, it wasn't us, because we roped in Hanna. And then after we roped in Hanna, we also roped in Liam to tape the deck. So we pretty much did nothing on this section.
It's really coming together now.
It really was. Another thing this tape does is create a shadow effect when you look in between your deck boards. So it adds protection and visual looks. Unfortunately, that's all we got time for in this episode, but catch us on the next one where we're going to be finally wrapping up the outside.
And just remember to like and subscribe.
It's so awkward, isn't it?